It was Jay's job. So he came as provost. Um, and actually, he came a year before I did. We had a high school senior. In talking about women's issues at Bethel, that's one of the few times I felt like women's issues were involved. I got real pushback from one of the trustees on the search committee, thinking, why would I not come with Jay? Why stay? He thought it was more my career. I did not care about my nursing career at Messiah. I just wanted our high school senior to be able to finish in Pennsylvania. So then I came a year later. So that's what actually brought me to Bethel. Are you referring more to what brought me as an employee to Bethel? That was an interesting journey. We now had 3 kids in college. I needed to work. Applied for several things through HR. I was willing to do anything. Jay and I have always worked at the same institution, starting at First Academy and Messiah. And I just wanted to work at Bethel. And there was nothing in nursing, and I really didn't want anything in nursing. So finally, after about 6 months of wanting a job here, I went into HR and said, 3 kids in college, I really need to work. I need a job. I'll apply at Northwestern, but I'd rather be here. And lo and behold, the copy center job opened up. So that's where I first started, as a tech in the copy center. And then when Marty, when she left as manager in the Ask office, I applied for that job, and that was phenomenal. I had the student contact, as I would say to people, teaching student contact like I had at Messiah as a nurse in the health center, but they didn't throw up on my feet. So it was a wonderful job. And I loved seeing change in students that happened through that. When we would go to concerts or sporting events, I felt like I knew more students than Jay did. Going to festival, I could pick out all kinds of students in the orchestra or choir or whatever. So that was really good. Well, I didn't like the name First Lady. It just implies hierarchy, and I really resisted being called First Lady. Some institutions, they're called University Ambassador or things like that. I had to look up what they called me here. Chief Executive Service Assistant was my job title, which you don't put on a name badge. But I was the first one to ever get compensation, I think. These are my comments, it's what I know, but I think I was the first one ever to get compensation. But the trustees really wanted me to go with Jay when he traveled, show up at as many things as we could. It fit our marriage because we've always viewed our work as a team. I almost like Aaron holding up Moses' hands. I didn't view it as subservient. I just viewed it as, this is my role. Jay had his role, whether provost or president, and we did it as a team. We did teach human sexuality when he was provost and had to give that up as president. We had started teaching that course back at Messiah. Another opportunity to know students. I actually looked up my job description because I had a formal job description. 40% was accompanying, and this is role as president's spouse, not as provost spouse. Accompanying him wherever he went, 40% of the time. We slept away from home between 135 to 150 nights a year. So I can't imagine a relationship with your spouse when you're apart that much of the time. We're so grateful that the trustees wanted us to do this together. And then, oversees social events and host dignitaries, appear at or host student events, events with parents, events at conferences like the Christian College Consortium, CCCU, Fellowship of Evangelical Seminary Presidents. We went to multiple conferences a year where they had good spouse programming. The whole job description ends with, and other duties as assigned. So, but I think my favorite thing I did was the Christmas card. One of our first conferences when Jay was provost in the spouse breakout sessions we had was how to make your Christmas card a development card. And I thought, oh, this does not fit me or Bethel. And I don't think it had personally been done by either the president or the spouse before us, done probably by communication and marketing. But I wanted the card that honored that this was Jesus' birthday. It was not a development card, but also reflected on what was happening at Bethel. So often they were my pictures. I'd often have to take a winter scene the year before. But I wanted the card to reflect the growth in students, and I wanted it to be a card that would speak to people who didn't know Jesus, and this might be the only card speaking about Jesus' birth. I love doing that. Yeah, one of my highlights. Not as much as expected of a male spouse, but especially, well, let's see, within the consortium group of 13, there were 2 male spouses. CIC had a significant male spouse program. And, a few of the breakouts were them alone, but mostly we were together. I learned one of my favorite lines from a male spouse: when you're asked a question that should not be answered, you say, "I prefer pink petunias to red ones." And that gets the point across that I'm not going to answer your question. But yeah, it was a good group. Granted, males were in the minority, a good group. I had gone to a CCC school. We had worked in Christian education, higher education mainly, at Messiah. And so coming here was just part of who we were and who we wanted to be. Now, there were some differences. One of the stark contrasts was Bethel students wore Bethel logo wear. And an outside person had said, your students really like Bethel. They're proud of Bethel because they wear Bethel clothing rather than Harvard or MIT or whatever. And another contrast was students smiled at you and made eye contact. And that had not been true at other places. So those would be a couple differences. And obviously, strong faith commitment, high academic standards. But yeah, familiar. We had been here before our son James applied and was accepted, but it was just too far for him to come, and where he was in his faith journey would not have probably been a good fit. And we knew Dave and Melva Brandt very well, so we had visited them. Dave and Jay had served together at Messiah. Dave Brandt came as provost here. When he left, Jay followed him as provost. So we've tracked with Brandts since college days. I would think the thing that he is most proud of, is the study abroad. It went from just a few. There was the England term before, and I'm sure there were a few other things that happened during J term. But Bethel became, at one point, in the top 10 in our category of schools in students that study abroad. I so often refer to what Jay had done or said, but he had said, how can you be educated if you aren't out of what's comfortable and normal for you? So I would think that would be one of the biggest changes that we just love to think about. And along with that, our connection with Daystar. That had started under Dave Brandt, but it was enhanced even more. I think it was in 2010 we signed a strengthened MOU with Daystar where for every 3 students that Bethel would have at Daystar, that money would be banked and we would bring 1 Daystar student here. I remember one semester we had 3 Daystar students here. And some of those kids we follow. One is back in Kenya as a missionary to the Maasai tribes. It was a phenomenal connection. And then I would think, too, when you think of global, Uganda Christian and the work the nursing department has done with Uganda Christian. We were blessed to be there for the graduation, I think what year that was, probably around 2011, I think it was, when Uganda graduated their first master's level nurses. And if I'm remembering correctly, it's like there were only 1 or 2 in the whole country. And I don't like cameras and this type of thing and being in public, but I was asked to speak at that commencement as well, to represent Bethel and to honor nurses as they were being launched. See, I grew up with all male cousins. This male-female thing has never really registered with me. I was always out with the guys. Walking up the stairs and looking at that wall at the top of the stairs, one of the first things that made me realize some women had issues was I can't remember the reference, and I should. We are God's workmanship. And it was like, that's got to be changed. It was already on the wall, and it had to be changed to we are God's masterpiece or creative. To me, there was kind of a so what, to quote scripture, we are God's handiwork. I never had issues as a woman at Bethel. I hope it wasn't because I was just Jay's spouse. One thing that was curious was phone messages. You know, if you would call and they would leave a message, women more than men had to add their title. This is Dr. Jane Doe, more than this is Sam Smith, period. So that was curious to me. I mean, changes for women while we were here. First ever female campus pastor. First female provost. Julie White was I think, the first ever female chair of the Board of Trustees. Yeah, I mean, those were significant changes. Yeah, we did engaged couples, which we had done every semester except once since 1978. So that was one thing when we came, we didn't want to give up. He had a guys group, I had a gals group. Well, kind of unofficially, but not in a real role. But Nancy Lundquist was always high on my top people to be admired. When I first came, I was in a sewing group with her, and so we heard some behind-the-scenes stories as we're sitting there doing her sewing projects. Some were pretty funny, and what a gracious, kind, gifted woman that she was. So admiring her from afar. I had 2 great women bosses, Deb Harless and Ruth Nelson. I admired Laurel so much. A woman in a largely male-defined role, and she did that job as well, if not better, than any male in that job. And to watch her impact on students was just inspiring. And I'm sure she took a lot of flack from some people, but it didn't bother her. She was focused on Jesus and mentoring students. And, what a gifted person to watch. I think another person who I admire, who I still admire, is Avis Soderstrom. She's the grease that kept Bethel going. And not many people knew what she did. But if Avis had not been here, a lot of things would have fallen through the cracks. Jay and I personally never had to think about what we had to do, where we had to be. She'd give us a spreadsheet, and she was so gracious and never demanded recognition. Well, and closer to home, Carolyn Barr, Jay's assistant. I view her as a bloom where you're planted person. Degrees didn't matter. Just following her gift mix. People would come into the office not to see Jay, but to see Carolyn, because they knew their day would be brightened just by talking with Carolyn. So people I admired wasn't so much status or role, but how they lived out their life in whatever job or role they were in. When I worked in the copy center for, I think it was 2 years, I'm not sure, and we were side by side, shoulder to shoulder all day long. And as you're doing your tasks, you could, you weren't focused on written material that you had to study or whatever. We just shared our lives together. And some of those gals we still keep in touch with, like at Christmas time. Gals group, there are a couple that I still stay in touch with. I think how women that really impacted me were the softball team. They are so much more fun to watch. Well, I shouldn't say this, but they are more fun to watch than a baseball team. I mean, the way they are in it together and cheering each other. And we would go on the spring break trips to Florida for their training time, both as a great time to interact with parents and donors, but to be with the students. And at mealtime, sitting around the table, it was open question, pick our brains, we could pick their brains, and what a fun time together. Jay's cabinet of 7 or 8 had 3 women, Deb, Kara, and Amy. One time, Jay had a study done. Somebody, I think, had requested a salary differences of faculty women, or faculty in general. And the result was, for equal levels or job descriptions, women actually were paid slightly more, which was a surprising outcome. Again, I feel like whether I'm female or male, that it didn't impact me much. Beginning in my nursing career maybe is where it was most felt, because I'm old. Back then, doctors were male, nurses were female. So it wasn't so much males had more power, it was doctors had more power. So that would be different today, where there are more female doctors and more male nurses. I don't know what the dynamics would be, but I didn't view it as a gender issue more than the doctors were doctors and we were just nurses. When we lived in Pennsylvania, our church there had a female pastor. Our church here has a female pastor. Doesn't matter to me at all. Yeah, and as I said, I grew up with all guy cousins, and it's just part of my world. Not so much consortium or CCCU, but in CIC, the huge secular group of 100 in 50 schools or something. I don't even remember how many schools. I think women were more scrambling for status than within the Christian organizations. And I don't know if that's true or not, but that's a little bit of what I observed. Yeah, I would have no idea how the treatment of students. It was more at these conferences when we were in a spouse group, there was more discussion about roles and status, titles, than we had in consortium or CCCU. There was less ability to have friendships across the board. It was like, how can you have friendships with people on the cabinet? Well, they're good people. We interact with them a lot. They're our friends. But in CIC, it was almost unheard of that you could have a close friendship, as a spouse of a provost or the spouse of a president, that you couldn't have a close friendship with faculty or staff. I didn't understand that. And it's one of the things I loved about going to CIC, because we always came back thankful to be here. It's probably more who we are. Jay started out his career in student development, and until the day he dies, he'll be a student development person. And when we changed churches recently during COVID, we were bound and determined to finally have a Sunday school class with our age group, because we'd never done that before. And we're in the membership class, and there was a young couple in the class, and it's like two magnets. They bonded with us, we bonded with them, and we're still with young adults. It's our life. Well, I mentioned the Christmas card. I think the other favorite contribution, I could say, is the first ever donor trips. I was at a conference, and in one of the spouse sessions, it was how to do donor trips. And I thought, we can do that. And so I brought back those ideas and wish we'd started earlier. I think we went to Kenya and Amsterdam, Sweden and Norway, back to Kenya and Amsterdam because people had heard about it, wanted to go to Kenya, Israel and Greece. So we did 5 trips. I wish we had done more. They were never asked for money on the trip. It was more relationship building. Although on one trip, we got commitment for a huge amount of money. Not even an ask. Somebody who came up to Jay and said, I'd like to give Bethel this amount of money. I would say a real growth area for me related to that is I grew up in a family that didn't have much money. I really didn't know that till I went away to college and saw all the money that people had. We had a pond for skating, a brook for swimming, and a hill for skiing, and who needed more than that? And I was hesitant about working with high-end donors. And to delightfully learn that they're just ordinary people who want to use God's resources. Cultivating a relationship with Karen Larson of the Nelson Larson Science Building and the Nursing Lab. If you had breakfast with her at Perkins, you would not have known she had money, and she's Bethel's all-time biggest donor. So to get to know people like that was a real learning curve, but what an incredible experience that was. Well, I would hope things would be equal for women and men, is how I would respond to that part. I would hope that women would not feel less honored, less valued. But my hopes for Bethel is first, maintain a strong faith commitment, but not in a way of indoctrinating students. a phrase Jay coined when he was here as graduate adventurous Christ followers. That only happens if students are exposed to tough issues. I would hate for Bethel to become a black and white place. I hope students get to live in the gray areas of life. And while here, learn to deal with the tough issues, because this is a safe place, and out there, not so much. So to maintain a strong but robust, engaged Christian faith, and of course, high academics.